2018 came along with some of the best games the gaming industry had to offer, with instant hits like God of War and Red Dead Redemption 2. But like everything else, we also received a good number of blunders. Today we'll be covering 10 of the worst rated games of 2018. We begin our list with Sushi's Fear Effect Sedna. This role-playing game suffered from a very weak script and very poor voice acting. The AI of both allies and enemies was anywhere from subpar to downright laughable, rendering the need for the pause tactical feature of the game and leaving characters' abilities pretty much pointless. The soundtrack and puzzles were commended, although the use of sound effects were poorly received. Next up on our list is the movie-based virtual reality game Crisis on the Planet of the Apes. The very first thing that stood out to us in this game were the awkward controls that made even the most normal of tasks like walking extremely tedious, not to mention extremely slow. The combat system also left a lot to be yearning for. Because the button to fire a gun is the same one to aim, pick up weapons, and walk, it became difficult to use. The lack of variety in weapons and no projectiles like grenades did nothing to relieve the issue. The very spaced out autosave system made progressing through levels a chore, and glitches galore created frustrating situations that only hurt the overall experience more than what it already had. Coming in at number 8 on our list is Extinction. In Extinction, the hack-and-slash combat system often felt like a redundancy, as it mainly amounted to little more than button mashing to win battles, with upgrades and later enemies not doing much to change up the gameplay. When fighting against giants, players are able to latch onto pieces with a whip, but because of the default auto-targeting, it could potentially end up sending you in a completely different direction. The stages also came off as uninspiring and too similar to each other, with the story that failed to remain consistent, making it difficult for players to fully immerse themselves. Due to the random generation of the locations and enemies, the difficulty differed across the board. And to top it off, the very small amount of cutscenes in the game were ill-received with little to no motion and mediocre art. The next unfortunate game on our list is the virtual reality game Bravo Team. The story was largely described as a Call of Duty ripoff and had 3 endings, which was considered aggravating because there was no way to know at what point your choices would impact the flow of the story. The movement of the character was also extremely limited, being only able to move from one cover point to another, and any immersion the game provides is immediately thrown out the window once the player tries to interact with a wall or a barrel due to the view going from first person to third person. And finally, the player was not able to carry multiple weapons on their character. Alright, this next one on our list, we had to put it on our list. There was no question. Fallout 76 has been getting so much attention, and not in a good way. A bad launch aside, the game was deemed a grind fest, being filled with pointless quests and experience points. In an effort to make the PvP aspect of the game more player friendly, Bethesda made it so that in order for players to engage in PvP, they both had to consent to it, which players considered a waste of time due to the minuscule rewards. Players also criticized the lack of a respec option past level 50, which was only fixed with an update a while after its released. And the lack of NPCs was frowned upon from the community because it took away any sense of story the game could have had, being replaced with soulless holotapes. The game had so many technical issues and bugs that one review company flat out refused to finish the game to review it. Coming in at number 5 on our list is Rainbow Studios' MX vs ATV All Out. The visuals of the game were described as dull, and animations, especially the rider animations, were pretty lackluster. Game tearing and frame rate issues were extremely common to the point of making playing the game an eyesore and nearly unplayable. But in terms of content, the game was commended for the amount it provided, including a good number of career events, different modes the players can partake in, and the number of vehicles available, so it wasn't too bad. In 4th place comes Phantom 8 Studios' Past Cure. The game was criticized for the level design as being uninspired and split between stages that are nothing but gunfights and stealth missions that are unnecessarily difficult, adding more frustration to the game. The narrative side didn't do any better. The plot was riddled with holes and certain story elements were finished rather quickly, preventing players from feeling engaged. The combat system was regarded as lacking variety and the enemies behaved in rather simplistic ways. This list truly would have felt incomplete without mentioning Mad Mind Studios' Agony. The game itself revolves around the player who must traverse hell in order to escape. The game was criticized for its excessive use of a gory atmosphere to the point where reviewers found it lackluster after a while. The designs for enemies came off as uninspired and the voice acting for the first few important NPCs were considered adequate at best. The checkpoint system also garnered heavy criticism for its random placement across the vast environment, and the puzzles were deemed nothing short of an annoyance. Sitting at number 2 is Rebel Games' Super Street the Game. This game truly suffers from horrible driving mechanics, from the way the cars run to the way they handle corners. The track themselves are riddled with sharp turns that further exacerbate the problem how the cars corner. The AI itself was considered atrocious, the traffic was a great annoyance, and the opponents made races feel more like demolition derbies since they are constantly crashing into anything and everything. The visuals, while nothing to write home about, was about the only thing that was adequate. We can kind of chalk that up to being powered by Unreal Engine 4. And unfortunately, at the top of our list, we have Human Head Studios' The Quiet Man. This game was brutally criticized for the deliberate choice of heavily muting the game, attempting to give the player the impression of playing a deaf character. It also did not help that there were practically no subtitles for the player to read, and in order to play the game with sound, the player would have to complete the game first. The camera work was considered poor and cutscenes were overlaid over combat sequences, which became repetitive early on and ultimately frowned upon. And that completes our top 10 worst games of 2018. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. This is Rumbly Superset, and I'll see you guys next time. Later!